Seven Blue Skies channel is pleased to present a continuation of Paranormal, Book 3, Part 3, Legend of the Loch Ness Monster, by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. Okay guys, let's get back to the action. Eight, Riddle's End. Maggie, my angel, I swear I'm going to rip them apart. I'll slaughter them and toss their remains into the North Sea so that all the mysterious beasts will enjoy them. I was breathing hard as I almost ran, tracing the lines she had left, and the drops of blood, which at times would disappear and then show up again. My thoughts were racing, and panic paralyzed me. Breathing hard from between my teeth, I swore at and threatened them, though I didn't know exactly who they were. I was looking for anything to pour my anger upon, and I found nothing better than imaginary people to blame. My steps quickened, my muscles flexed. I became short of breath. I was sure I would find her at any minute, dead at my feet. And I would kneel next to her, rest her head on my knee, and she would tell me something I wouldn't catch and then turn her head and die. Envisioning this scene was driving me crazy. My steps and my pulse quickened. But here, I collided with someone. We both fell to the ground, and I stood up ready to fight, but I had found her. Maggie! Tears rushing to my eyes, I shouted frantically and tried to explain to her. But as if speaking to a wild horse, she said sweetly, "Hey, it's okay. Don't be scared, my darling. Nothing happened." And she showed me her hand wrapped with a piece of my shirt she wore. "I wounded my hand with your broken pen. That's all it is. Hey, calm down." And here, I'm ashamed to confess, my nerves broke completely and I started crying like a child, which quite shocked her. She patted my shoulder kindly, that type of kindness only women can show and only men can understand. All women are our mothers, and no matter how old we get, we remain their miserable newborn children. "Come on," said Maggie gently. "There's nothing to be scared of. Everything is going to be okay. Go ahead and cry. You'll feel better." After the storm had passed and I had calmed down, I told her then what had happened in the past 2 hours and that I had found an exit, and that I had thought she was wounded or murdered, and that I love her like I've never loved anyone in my life. In a practical way, she replied, "That's all very beautiful, but I've discovered something even stranger and more important. Come with me, but—" and she handed me a piece of my shirt she wore and said, "Blow your nose first. I don't like snotty-nosed children." "Okay." "That's better," she said. And I walked behind her in the narrow passage, which began widening out gradually until we found ourselves in a well-lit room with stone walls. You know how the pharaoh's burial chambers look inside the Great Pyramid? Well, if you know of it, you can save me the effort of describing this room. And if you haven't seen it, that's your problem. I'm too excited and unable to speak much. In a corner of the room she stood, a girl bound in a crossed position, her hair that ultra-blonde shade which can't possibly be British. She was totally exhausted, with clear signs of having been beaten badly about the face. Maggie exclaimed proudly, "Here's my discovery," and she gestured as if introducing us to each other at a social gathering and said, "I present to you Miss Erica Siegfried, the next sacrifice for the Loch Ness Monster." I was stunned. But I was starting to understand. This girl's name rang a bell, giving me an idea. I turned to her and asked, "Are you Danish?" With a hoarse voice she replied in English, "I am Norwegian. I study English literature in Edinburgh." "You see," Maggie cried, "blonde, of Scandinavian descent. The killer kidnapped her and chained her up here. And he's been feeding her while awaiting the day of sacrifice and—" Annoyed, I interrupted, "Can you spare us the lecture? At least until we free the miserable girl? By the way, why haven't you done so?" She answered simply, "First of all, I don't have anything to free her with. Plus, my hand is wounded, or had you forgotten?" And she touched my biceps, saying happily, Let's see what my hero can do with these chains. Come on, show us." My face reddened, and I attempted to budge the chains, but with no use. I would only injure the miserable girl's wrists like this. She clenched her teeth and moaned as I worked. And after about 10 minutes, I gave up. My palms were cut and bleeding. I hung my head in shame, announcing, "It's no use." "Let me try," suggested Maggie, and she stuck the end of the broken pen into the padlock on the chains, moving it around several times until the padlock sprung open, and she began taking the chains off the Norwegian girl's neck and wrists while looking at me gloatingly, saying, "All you have is brute force, and I wish that would even work." The girl sat broken on the floor and started telling her story. As I mentioned, she was an English lit major in Edinburgh. She came to know a Norwegian guy who said he studied medicine there. He invited her to his home and then drugged her and kidnapped her. He then moved her here, and when she woke up, she found herself chained in this position. He fed her regularly and advised her to prepare herself for a great sacrifice befitting her ancestors' souls, which would happen in 2 weeks' time when she would give her body for the lucky Loch Ness monster to devour. "Did he visit you regularly?" "No," the girl replied. "I've seen him twice a day, emerging from the darkness of the basement. I don't know where he comes from or where he goes." "That's not in question," Maggie said with scorn. "Of course he comes from my father's living room and goes back through there. He must have been visiting you at dawn and at midnight, when the manor is empty of people with prying questions." I said to Maggie, "Do you think so? And how does he enter the manor?" "He never had to enter the manor." "What do you mean?" "I mean," said Maggie, "he was always there. I think, my dear Erica, that this man has blue eyes, a thick yellow mustache, and long blonde hair. In short, like a Viking we see in comic books." "Exactly!" Erica cried. "And his name is Alfred Halthorpe." "He is a servant in our manor," Maggie explained, "who visits Edinburgh quite often. He must have set his trap around you, and around poor Jocelyn." Still confused, I asked, "Why does your family have a Norwegian servant?" "What's wrong with that?" Maggie retorted. "He is polite, disciplined, and speaks very good English, and my father enjoys his Scandinavian features." "All the threads are gathering now," I said. "This servant was working for you when one night he overheard a conversation between your father and the late Commander Gold about the monster of Loch Ness, to whom the Vikings used to offer sacrifices. Then he happened to see the horn, the pendant, and the map. And then this servant began to change. True, we don't know the circumstances which led to this change. Was it some sort of patriotic fervor, or ethnic beliefs which moved in his subconscious, or a love for mischief? Or was it the need to feel special? We'll never know except from him. The important thing is that an idea was taking shape in my mind." I went on. "So he stole the necklace and followed this secret passageway, which he found accidentally, to carry out his terrible mission. He was smarter than all of us when he entered the passage for the first time, and did not neglect to secure the wall behind him. He realized that the passages lead him near Sacrifice Rock, so he sawed through the iron bars to provide an easy exit. And he started kidnapping blonde girls of Scandinavian ancestry and locking them in here. This dramatic whim in his blood made him think the Loch Ness monster would only eat the same kind of victims it was accustomed to in the past, Scandinavians, the ancestors of the northern invaders. And when the girl comes with, according to his calculations, he chains the girl to the rock and stands near Urquhart Castle and blows in the horn. And then comes the beast, who remembers the dinner call and fulfills his duty, and the misery ends. You've been born again, Miss Siegfried." The girl whimpered and trembled, saying between her teeth, "It was horrible. He comes to me reciting pieces of poetry in an unknown language, and he forces strange-tasting food into my mouth and says some weird prayers and even forces me to repeat after him. And if I refuse, he beats me. He was preparing your soul for the great sacrifice." Nervously, Maggie suggested, "Well, let's get out of this awful basement now. Daddy must be worried sick about us. Plus, we have to find this killer before he notices we're on to him." She then looked at the girl kindly and asked, "Can you walk, dear?" "No, my feet are totally numb. I haven't been able to move for ages." Maggie gestured in my direction while winking at the girl, and then she came over and whispered in my ear. "Maggie," I exclaimed, "don't tell me you want me to carry her." "And why not? Unfortunately, you're the only man here." "But she's not light," I protested. "And why can't you believe I'm not Tarzan? It's only in bad movies that the man is muscular with wide shoulders and good at throwing punches, and pulling off chains, and fighting bears, and carrying girls who can't walk." "Rifat, carry her." "Okay." And so I carried the girl and went staggering with Maggie following behind, guided by the lines she drew, back to the meeting point. And then we followed the curvy lines I had drawn until we reached the window in the rock wall. The waves of Loch Ness crashed onto the rocky beach as we emerged there. In the distance, we could see that ominous rock. Maggie looked at it and gave the girl a meaningful look, implying, "Have you seen what awaited you?" The girl trembled, her fingers gripping my arm tightly. We had won the battle, but would we win the war? 9. Ewan Fraser. Sir James presented us quite a delicious meal after we left the basement. Poor Erica devoured her food like a ravenous person, while Maggie played in the butter dish with her knife, drawing random shapes on the edge of her plate. She was completely distracted. Lighting a cigar, Sir James said, "Eat well. It's a miracle you survived." With my mouth full of food, I remarked, "It's strange that you knew nothing about the underground passages." "Naturally," Sir James answered. "Our family manuscripts mention multiple other tunnels, not specifying their locations. Also, there's no mention of buried treasure in any of them, so why would I waste my time?" Maggie lifted her gaze from her plate as if remembering something. "Daddy, where did Alfred go?" With annoyance, Sir James shook his head and blew out cigar smoke, saying, "We haven't found him. That bastard escaped last night." Confused, I remarked, "But how did he know we discovered his plan?" "I," said Maggie shyly, and she reached into her pocket and brought something out, a small card. She explained, "I noticed this last night when we went down into the passages, but I thought nothing of it." Ah, that old trick. The bastard had stuck that card into the gap in the wall so that if someone opened the wall, the card would fall. Then, if he wanted to enter the passages but did not find the card, he would realize someone had discovered the basement and the girl. That's why he didn't bring Erica any dinner last night. He was about to enter the basement carrying her dinner when he found the card missing. So he knew he had been discovered, and so he fled. "But what do we do now?" asked Maggie. Sir James lowered his head, thought for a moment, and mumbled, "He won't stop trying. He still has the horn and the pendant, and his demented plan." "Should we call the police to surveil the rock?" "No," Sir James insisted. "I have a better idea." Picking up the last piece of meat on the table and tossing it into my mouth, I commented, "Well, that's good news, because my head is about to explode from negative thoughts." Cryptically, Sir James said, "Tonight, I'll introduce you to a very unique person." Ewan Fraser remarked, "The number of crazy people in this world exceeds the number of humans entirely." Sir James nodded in agreement, and it seemed to me that he had missed the hidden insult in this sentence, for all of us, including himself. But Fraser continued, "Take this Alfred, for example. He fancies his ancestors' honor is contingent upon throwing girls into the jaws of this beast." Ewan Fraser was a well-built, muscular man with a tan complexion. He sported a bushy blonde beard and messy blonde hair, and his gaze was piercing and rude. He ate nervously for no apparent reason. At the dinner table, Sir James had introduced him to us as an old friend and an avid hunter. He had even hunted sharks. "A shark hunter?" I asked. "Yes, and whales." "Whales?" "And tigers." With childlike enthusiasm, Sir James explained. He has hunted crocodiles, and traveled to India to hunt tigers, and to Africa to hunt elephants before it was illegalized by the local authorities. Ewan patted his chest in pride and said, "As a matter of fact, there's no type of hunting I haven't tried." And he started regaling us with stories about his trips to the jungles of Africa, the grassy savannas, and the high seas. He had hunted everything from birds to whales, and he was a crack shot with all kinds of firearms. And I am not a jealous type. I was never given to being the center of attention. But I felt a lump in my throat as I observed the telltale signs of amazement on Maggie's face as she hung on his every word. With his words, he carried her with him to the Amazon basin, the Congo jungles, and China's mountains as she listened, dreaming. I mean, I'm not a jealous person, but I hate this type who enjoys torturing God's lovely creatures. The type who could never sleep peacefully before making sure yet another animal would not live to see tomorrow's sun. And Maggie likes him. He was saying, "That bastard Alfred deserves to be drug out in the street and shot, then his corpse cut up and offered as dog food in my back garden." Even with his keenness on justice, he seemed as evil as the devil himself. How had Maggie and Sir James not noticed this? I leaned over to Maggie and whispered in her ear, "Why did your dad invite this serial killer?" She did not answer as she was listening to him, her eyes shining and her lips parted a bit. "Maggie." She turned to me distracted, as if I had awoken her from a beautiful dream, and asked, "What? Why did your dad invite this serial killer?" Annoyed, she whispered back, "I think there's only one explanation, and I don't think you're that dumb. But let me listen, because his talk is very interesting to me." And she went back to listening to him. I took a sip of the juice in front of me, feeling that all the juice in the universe could not succeed in assuaging my thirst and the bitterness in my throat. And dinner had ended. Ewan wiped his mouth with a handkerchief and announced that he must leave but would come back soon to discuss this business, as he put it. He shook Sir James' hand and then mine, with a hand seemingly cut from stone. And he took Maggie's hand, bent down and kissed it, his eyes never leaving hers. And then he bowed slightly and left. As soon as the door had closed, I asked Sir James, "Don't tell me you're going to make a deal with that animal to kill Loch Ness Monster." He shrugged casually and said, "We haven't agreed on anything yet, but I really want him to kill that beast." "And why?" I asked. He looked at me in surprise. "Do you have another solution?" "Yes. How is this our business? Why don't you call the police, and it'll all be over?" Patiently, he placed his hand on my shoulder like some kind of priest giving advice to a sinner at the altar, and he said, "Come on, son. Killing the beast will benefit us in 2 ways. 2 birds with 1 stone. First, we will end the chain of sacrifices which will continue as long as Halthorpe is free. And will also fulfill our shared dream. We will have the body of Loch Ness Monster intact, for the whole world to see. Scientists will study him and preserve his body in the Natural History Museum. Fraser will hand me scientific glory, and the fruit of our struggle on a silver platter." "But even if we accept that," I said, "how can he kill it?" "That is the problem," said Sir James, and he smiled and winked at me as he left the room, saying, "You can be sure he will find a way." I did not argue with him, but I believed that the Loch Ness Monster deserved to live, after living free for 8 centuries, down through the generations. He was not more evil than a lion who eats meat and has no fault in that. If someone threw a human to a hungry lion and the lion devoured it, should we punish the lion or the criminal who caused this? Regardless, such a thought was premature, as I doubted this braggart could hurt even the most vicious wild bunny. People had been hunting this beast since 1933, and had all failed. So how could Ewan Fraser succeed when all others had failed? In the morning, I went to Maggie's room. Her door was open, and she sat at a small table, something similar to headphones on her ears. In front of her, she had all the tools used in sculpting, a complicated network of wires, and a microphone hanging centimeters away from her mouth. From a complicated machine which looked like an EKG came a long paper tape with lines traced upon it. Next to it stood a thermos of coffee and a cup. Upon seeing me, she lifted her hand without a word. Curious, I asked, "What is all this?" But she stopped me with the look in her eyes and pointed with annoyance at the paper tape emerging from the machine. On it, continuous spiky and broken lines were drawn. Now I get it. She was using a complicated machine which traces sound waves, providing a graph which was easy to measure and analyze. But what was the use of this experiment? And what compelled her now specifically to remember she is a physicist? And here she picked up something long and white, bringing it close to her mouth in front of the microphone, and blew in it. Nothing. No sound. But the tape kept coming from the machine, filled with continuous lines. She hit a button on the machine to turn it off and then pulled the headphones off her head. She exhaled audibly and then poured herself some coffee and offered me some. She handed me the thermos and another cup, saying, "Drink. Help yourself, because I'm busy." Taking a seat, understanding that I could talk to her now, I said, "No thanks, I don't want any. But what are you doing?" "As you see." I took the horn she had fashioned and regarded it with wonder, commenting, "It's well made." "Thanks. Take care not to trip on all these wires." "Where did you get the ivory to sculpt this?" I asked. "You and Fraser gave me a piece last night." "Ah, what a gentleman." Maggie tore off the paper tape, stood up, and went to a piece of transparency of similar traced lines hanging next to her bed. She placed the two tracings on top of each other and asked, "What do you think?" The tracings matched perfectly, but I was still confused, saying, "Amazing. But what does all this mean?" With enthusiasm, she explained to me that the transparency depicted the sound waves the stolen horn had made. As for the paper, it showed the sound waves of the horn she had spent all night crafting. She was trying to match the frequency and wavelengths, and they were a perfect match, meaning she had recreated the ancient horn used to call the Loch Ness monster. "But it makes no sound," I remarked. "No. The frequency of the sound waves is above the range of human hearing, but other ears can hear it, exactly like a dog whistle. Loch Ness monster remembers these sound waves and awaits them." "If that were true," I said, "he would have broken into your room right now, wagging his tail like a dog, because I'm certain you've blown into this horn loads of times already." She slapped my shoulder in jest and exclaimed, "Don't be silly. The sound range of this horn will not reach the lake unless we blow in it near Urquhart Castle." She contemplated the horn in amazement, like a sculptor standing back to admire a statue just finished. "And just like that," she said, "we can call Nessie whenever Ewan is ready to kill it. I've finished my work here and only have to sculpt the pendant now." And she opened a book in front of her and took out a paper on which was drawn a sketch of the stolen sacrificial pendant, and a rough drawing resembling a dragon devouring a girl looking up at the sky. "Rifat, I need your help because you're good at drawing and sculpting. We have to make a bronze pendant matching this drawing." "With pleasure. But why?" Surprised at my idiocy, she replied, "Sometimes I don't get you, Rifat. How will Loch Ness monster devour me if I'm not wearing the pendant?" End of Part 3. Okay guys, we'll be uploading the finale very soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe button and click all on the bell to get notified as soon as it's up. And if you like this video, be honest and hit the like button. Cheers!